Hello, my sober lovelies. Before we dive in, I'm really excited to announce my group coaching program for women is live, and you can join now. So excited for this because let's be real here. Quitting drinking isn't just about saying no to the glass of wine or booze. It's about what comes after. All the fear, the boredom, the late night anxiety, and the stories you've been telling yourself for years. And that's where my Rewired Sober group coaching program for women comes in. It's only $247. I'm being totally transparent on the price. It's for 3 months, and you'll learn how to shift your mindset, build habits that actually stick, and question the core beliefs that have been keeping you stuck, and find healthier ways to deal with that loneliness and that now what feeling. The best part is you don't have to do it alone. We'll have live group coaching sessions weekly, and there'll be a bunch of women walking through it with you. It's not another cookie cutter sobriety program for mommy vloggers. It's neuroscience meets real life, and it's designed for women to help you not just stay sober, but actually feel good living sober. You can join anytime, and I'd love to see you on the inside. So start today, get instant access. The link's in the show notes. Welcome to Rewired Sober, the podcast where we unpack what it really takes to rewire your brain after alcohol. Hi, I'm your host, Kate Vitella, a registered nurse, board certified in mental health and addiction, sober since 2018, and a coach who blends neuroscience, lived experience, and real talk to help women break the shame spiral and rebuild their thinking with tools like journaling, humor, and honest conversation. This isn't surface level sobriety. This is where the healing gets deep, grounded, and unapologetically honest. So let's get into it. Welcome back, folks. This is going to be a solo episode because after some thinking, I realized I feel like I did a bad job explaining why I renamed the podcast Rewired Sober. In the episode where I discussed the renaming, I talked a lot about Instagram and trying to organize my brand messaging and just a lot of what I was going on internally. But I didn't go into my absolute fascination with how the brain is able to rewire and recover. And about a year ago, I think it was maybe 2 years ago, I created a YouTube video where I attempted to explain how addiction works in the brain. And I'll link it here in the show notes if you want to watch it, because the information is correct, although I think I simplified it down to whereas I would recommend that you also consult the resource. But once I discovered these processes of how addiction works in the brain and this sort of maddening looping trap we get stuck in, and how our neurotransmitters are hijacked and our hormones are hijacked, and how our brain tries to compensate for all of this, I was literally changed forever. I was like, this information is not only groundbreaking, but it's the answer to so many of my questions, as in, am I broken? Am I flawed? Why is this happening? Why do I feel absolutely crazy? And the more that I studied brain science, the more that I was reassured that my brain was just doing its job, that I wasn't some broken, screwed up human being. And I kind of want to take you through my discovery process on that and how I came to this realization. And it first starts with Dr. Judith Grissel's book, Never Enough. And let's see, who is she? So she's I think she's a neuroscientist. She's also in recovery. The book was published in 2019. And when I read her book and I started studying the information she presented, it changed everything for me. So I'm going to take you back a little bit. First, though, I read Holly Whitaker's book, Quit Like a Woman. And I got to give credit where credit's due here because she credited Dr. Judith Grissel's book, Never Enough. And Holly Whitaker introduced a bit about the A-B process of alcohol. Now, typical me, I'm going to follow the breadcrumbs here and get to the research and figure out more because this was so intriguing to me when I read Holly's book. So there I go. I find Judith Grissel's book, and then I go and find the clinical studies she's referencing. Now, the clinical theory that Dr. Judith Grisel references the most in her book that is the most impactful to me is Solomon and Corbett's opponent process theory, which was first proposed in the 70s. I think it was 1974. And basically what it does is it explains how emotional and physiological responses are regulated by a paired opposing process. So once that initially activates, with your initiating stimulus, then the other one counteracts to restore balance. So every emotional or physiological experience, which was dubbed the A process, triggers an opposing reaction or B process. And the theory also goes on to say over time, the A process gets weaker and the B process gets stronger and more prolonged. And this is huge because as it applies to addiction, the A process is that immediate pleasurable effect we get from a drug. Okay, in this case, alcohol. Like we drink alcohol, we feel euphoric, we feel relaxed. And in my video, I said A process, A is for alcohol, B is for brain. Because what I was trying to get you to understand is the A process, you get that immediate effect. And I explain what that immediate effect is with alcohol and the neurotransmitters involved. And then how the B process comes in and the brain is compensating. The brain is always seeking balance. So if we throw a sedative at the brain, then the after effect, the B process, is anxiety, irritability, hangover. And when we repeat this use, the A part of the alcohol, it diminishes over time. So that's where we get the term tolerance because we need more alcohol, more of the stimulus to produce the euphoria, the calmness. Because also the B process gets more intensified. Your withdrawal from alcohol intensifies as time goes on. And that is why so many people, eventually they're not drinking or using to get high. They're drinking to feel normal, to avoid the crash, to avoid going into withdrawal, the shakes, the sweats, the vomiting. And this also explains why addiction escalates over time. It becomes more about avoiding pain than seeking pleasure. I know personally for me, once I started going down that rabbit hole with alcohol, it very quickly got to the point where I was avoiding the pain. I was drinking the next day because my anxiety was starting to ramp up, and I'll explain that in a minute. And I was already beginning to mitigate the consequences of my drinking the day before. And this was early on in my drinking. Now, later on in my drinking, I was full on drinking just to avoid the detox process, just to avoid the shakes. But in the beginning, I quickly noticed myself starting to get more anxious around the time when it would be the uncorking hour. Around the 5 o'clock witching hour, as we would say, I would feel my body getting anxious, getting excited, getting kind of amped up and ready to drink. Now, that is not because I'm a fucked up individual. That is science. There's an actual neurobiology going on here. So there's neurotransmitters involved in this process as well. And I want to explain a bit about the neurotransmitters, and then I'm going to go back to the witching hour and sort of how this all evolves. Now, bear with me when I go into neurotransmitters because I don't imagine you're driving down the road dying to hear about all this. It is hard to envision unless you're looking at a diagram. And that's why I made the video, because in the video I show like GABA, glutamate up, GABA, glutamate down. And it was my way of trying to make it as easy as possible and also explaining the trap that we go into. But if we go back to the neurotransmitter breakdown of what's actually happening in your brain, essentially, like alcohol is a central nervous system depressant, right? And so when you first drink alcohol, the neurotransmitter GABA, it is a calming, inhibitory neurotransmitter. Alcohol actually mimics that. So you feel chill, loose, relaxed. That's, your first few drinks. And your neurotransmitters that supply glutamate, alcohol actually blocks those. And glutamate is the excitatory neurotransmitters. So increased GABA blocking glutamate. And so you're feeling good. You're feeling slowed down, kind of foggy. That's not to mention how alcohol hits your dopamine reward pathway, interacts with your serotonin, your moods, your emotions. And that's the beginning. And that's how I described the A process for alcohol. Now, the B process, as the brain is like, whoa, what the hell? The alcohol starts to wear off. The effects of GABA start to the GABA increase start to wear off. And the brain compensates. So your glutamate, your excitatory neurotransmitters increase, your stress hormones increase, and you actually end up, the net result, feeling more anxious. And when we go into the hormones involved, it's like when you drink, your body actually interprets alcohol as like a toxic threat. So it activates cortisol, your stress hormone. You might feel relaxed in the beginning, but your body's kind of low-key panicking. And then that adrenaline and epinephrine spike afterward, that restless irritability, racing heart over time, that is your body trying to counteract. And over time, this constant ping-ponging of all these neurotransmitters, up and down of emotions, it just leaves your stress system sort of fried. So when she's talking about Solomon and Corbett in her book, Dr. Judith Crisell literally talks about how she's not a tattoo girl, but if she was, she would get figure 4 tattooed on her arm in the opponent process theory. Now, I'm a tattoo girl, so I'm looking at this thinking, why would anyone tattoo this? But she's right in the sense that looking at these diagrams explains so much about what's going on. So if I go to the actual opponent process theory and I look at, figure 4, figure 5, basically what it's looking like is on a scale of 1 to 100, in the first few stimulations, then A, the curve is pretty high. Maybe it's the A for alcohol, the introductory stimulus, it goes up to close to 70. So first couple times you're drinking, or first few years or whatever, it's feeling really good. Then the B process in that particular model, in the first few simulations, dips you down to about the 20 mark. So your body's learning to compensate. It's learning what to produce to counteract that stimulus, to how to bring you back to homeostasis. Because remember, the brain's entire goal is to bring you back to normal, to a state of homeostasis. It's always looking to bring you back to baseline. So then the opponent process theory says after time goes on, then after many stimulations, then the A part, the A process on a scale of 1 to 100, when you introduce that, it only goes up a little tiny bit. So the effect is just a little bit from alcohol, right? Explained by tolerance, explained by adaptation. So if I were to say that little A bubble maybe goes up to 10 or 20, but the B part, the counteracting part, goes way down because over time, the B process becomes so much bigger, faster, stronger that you sort of live in the low level withdrawal. And what affects this? Well, um, how often, how much time in between you're drinking, um, how much recovery time you have. I didn't start feeling actual withdrawal until years into my drinking. Now, in the beginning, I could certainly sense that low level of anxiety when the 5 o'clock hour was hitting. I was like, it's time to, but really, I processed it as it's time to party. It's time to drink, right? I need a drink. And I wasn't really thinking, oh, maybe my stress hormones are jacking up a little bit. Maybe my excitatory transmitters are jacking up a little bit in preparation because I've been drinking at 5 o'clock. I didn't think that. Okay, so what's going on with that part of it? So, as you can see, I've just recapped like how the brain is trying to balance things out for us. And honestly, I have a love-hate relationship with the brain for that because it can really kind of F you up when you're trying to be a drinker, right? It's going to mess up your drinking. So, what happens is the brain starts to prepare you for the pour. It sort of gets ahead of you. So, a lot of us talk about the wine witch, like, oh, or the witching hour. It's 5 o'clock, and this is when I feel like I do really good throughout the day until this part of the day, and then I cave. And there's a science behind this. So let us not beat ourselves up. Let us understand. That is why we're calling this Rewired Sober, folks, because we're going to understand this stuff. So the brain with habitual drinkers will start to pregame your first drink by ramping up your excitatory systems, your glutamate, your cortisol, your adrenaline, even before the first sip. Why? To stay balanced, to stay ahead of you. Your brain knows that booze is coming and wants to get ahead of the sedation. Your brain knows you're about to sedate it. So the wild thing is that your brain stays ahead of you. And if you're someone who has developed a habit, or let's call it what it is, a dependence on alcohol, your brain becomes so uncannily good. It's so good at predicting when you're about to drink. Not only that, but like I said, it starts adjusting itself in advance to maintain homeostasis. Because alcohol isn't just something that makes you tipsy and feel good. It's a massive, powerful central nervous system depressant. It's a massive depressant. And your brain hates when you throw it off balance. So let's say it's 5 o'clock. You walk in the door, you kick off your shoes, and you have that little voice like, okay, it's time for wine. Before the glass even hits your lips, your brain has already started ramping up those excitatory neurotransmitters. It's going to brace for impact because it knows alcohol is coming. It's been down this road before, right? You trained your brain. Just it's Pavlovian, just like Pavlov's dog learned to drool at the sound of a bell, your brain starts firing up your stress chemicals and cranking up the volume on your nervous system in anticipation of being sedated. So this explains so much, doesn't it? If you really dive into the science of it, you start to understand yourself a little bit more. And I'll never forget the first time this kicked in for me. I was driving to go have dinner with my parents. It was a couple-hour drive, always a fun, chill, relaxing time, enjoying their company. But on the way, I realized they didn't want wine with dinner because they were trying to cut back, and it was approaching the 5 o'clock hour. And I was starting to grip the steering wheel. And I felt myself like compulsively, like, what the hell? I'm so anxious. Pulled over to a Safeway, a grocery store, and bought some mini wines to shove in my suitcase so that I could drink secretly at my parents'. And when I got out of the grocery store, I was so amped up and feeling so anxious that I drank one of the mini wines in my car before I even pulled up to their house. Now, when you apply the opponent process theory to this and how my brain was preparing me, it totally makes sense. And it's not to completely let me off the hook here, right? I did make that decision to drink. However, my body and my brain were all jacked up. They were like ready for me to drink. I felt anxious. My heart was racing. I was gripping on the steering wheel. I didn't know why I was anxious. I just knew I was not going to sit through this dinner without alcohol. And so this is the emotional roller coaster that we're on. And I really think it's important that people understand the science, the brain science of addiction, and how we can learn this, be empowered by this, quit throwing around false narratives about willpower and mocktails and bullshit that isn't real, and really dive into the science and start educating ourselves on what we're going through. So I felt like it was important to explain this stuff. This isn't just the reason why I wanted to, rename the podcast. It explains my passion for addiction science. I may get the AB process tattooed on my arm because once I was able to learn this, I mean, it was so incredibly fascinating to me because it explained the why behind the craving, the anxiety, the tolerance, the withdrawal, and even some of my relapse patterns. And once I got a hold of this, sobriety stopped feeling like this mysterious, sort of shame-based struggle. And it started making sense from more of like a neurobiological rebalancing act. So for me, thinking of being rewired and it being in the process of rewiring for sobriety removes shame. I don't, I stopped feeling crazy. Um, I stopped feeling like I was the only one who woke up at 3 a.m. in a panic and needed more alcohol all the time, you know. And it showed me that my brain was just trying to keep me alive by restoring balance, not sabotaging me. The explanation around tolerance and craving and why it's so hard at the 5 o'clock hour. And I think it normalizes this messy middle of recovery. In early sobriety, a lot of people get tripped up by the fact that they haven't completely rebalanced, right? They're still going through post-acute withdrawal. Maybe the AB process is still kind of jacked up. It's going to take a while to stop feeling so anxious and bizarre and foggy and this roller coaster of hormones and neurotransmitters. And early sobriety can be so discouraging because you don't feel immediately better. And when I talk about early sobriety, I'm talking about all the way up to 2 years. And that's just kind of medical speak for, because post-acute withdrawal can last up to 2 years. So some people categorize early sobriety as 6 months. But I know after doing this work with people for a while, that the post-acute withdrawal and some of these rebalancing processes and the mood swings and all of it can go on for well into 2 years. So I want Rewired Sober to be a place where you learn about the brain and you learn about addiction science. And it helps you to create a plan, right? It helps you to understand your neurological signals. And so you don't put yourself in this box of weak or broken or, just different or wrong. Now, I do imagine, as I'm fumbling with my words here, that someone's listening to this saying, okay, I get it, but why me? Why is it that when I drink, that I am addicted and I drink more, eliciting a bigger B response and the loop goes on? How can some people drink and they don't fall into this predicament? And that's another podcast episode because I really want to go into the different theories of addiction. Dr. Mark Lewis does an excellent job in his book, The Biology of Desire. It's an ongoing discussion about what causes certain people to be drawn to drinking over and over and over again, whereas others can drink one and put it down. But that's not the argument for this podcast. In this podcast, I really wanted you to understand the complex and fascinating process that is going on underneath. It is not just that you have a craving that you cannot overcome. And so I would encourage you, watch the video link. Know that I simplified it for understanding, but it's still legitimate. It's still accurate information. And then dive in a little bit on your own. Check out the opponent process theory of addiction if you're a geek like me. But stay open to new ideas and to the concept that we can and will rewire these processes over time through abstinence, through consistency, and oftentimes through some of the practices I utilize in coaching, which I taped an entire 2-part series on those practices and how they help rewire the brain. But the take-home point here is hope, is understanding your brain and body, hope for recovery, empowerment to move forward, and not get trapped in the weird crap that people say on the internet that maybe isn't even really true. And that it isn't helping you. It's just shaming you, gaslighting you, making you feel broken. You know, in AA, they say alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful. And after understanding brain science, I no longer think of alcohol as cunning and baffling because I understand it. And the brain is just doing its job. Some neuroscientists will actually say addiction means your brain is functioning healthy. It means your brain is doing what it's programmed to do to bring you back to homeostasis. So I am no longer sitting in shame and mystery. And I'm going to wrap this episode up. Hopefully this made sense. If I can, I will link a diagram in the show notes as well. As always, reach out to me with questions. I am now a 46-year-old woman that is rewired sober on TikTok. Yes, I ticked the talk. Good, that was a dumb joke. But I'm on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. And yeah, I'm ready to take this topic by storm. So thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for tuning in to Rewired Sober. You can find me on my Instagram at Rewired Sober, where there are links to catch up with me and all the things I'm working on in my coaching business, or the link tree to my business directly will be in the show notes. I so appreciate you joining me on this journey, and I welcome any feedback or any topics you want to hear about, things that you're struggling with or interested in. I love you all so very much, and I'm just so enjoying doing this with you.